off usually every time with having the legislators get up, get near a microphone and introduce themselves so you get a chance to see who they are. Also, I'd remind you that to get the most amount of discussion in, I'd like to see you line up like the airport when the airplanes are ready to take off. Behind the mic, we've got one in the back, two in the back, and also this one here is available. Come up if you're closer to this one. So line up for a question so we don't have to wait for you to get out of your seat. Going to start off this morning. Chris, I think, is ready to rumble to introduce himself.
Good morning. My name is Chris Bray. I live in New Haven, and I'm one of your two state senators. I was also your House rep once upon a time, so it's always especially nice to be back in Weybridge. You are the only folks on the legislative breakfast circuit that have apple pie for breakfast, so it's a great tradition. In the Senate, we serve on two committees. We have a morning and an afternoon committee. My morning committee, which I chair, is Natural Resources and Energy. We worked on a variety of bills. Maybe we'll get to talk about today. My afternoon committee is Government Operations. Happy to talk about those bills as well. So good to see you all.
Terry Norris from Shoreham. I represent the Addison Rutland District, Benson, Orwell, Shoreham, and Whiting. I am on the Agriculture and Forestry Committee in the House.
Good morning, I'm Robin Shy from Middlebury, and I'm your representative for Middlebury and East Middlebury, and I sit on House Ways and Means.
Hi everyone, I'm Peter Conlon. I live in Cornwall. I represent Cornwall, Leicester, Salisbury, Ripton, Goshen, and Hancock, and I'm on the House Education Committee.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ruth Hardy. I'm your other state senator. I serve on the Agriculture Committee in the morning and the Education Committee in the afternoon. And I'm happy to answer questions about any of those topics or anything else.
Good morning, Harvey Smith, and Weybridge is one of my towns, so pleased to be here. And I sit on the House Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife Committee.
We ready?
I just wanted to thank the representatives for being here. I'd like to encourage them to talk to the other individuals that are our representatives to make sure that they make this a priority. This is one of the most important democratic things that we can do, is to be able to talk one-on-one with our legislators. I'd also ask you to keep bringing friends and neighbors to these so that we get a good number of people and get some good representation. Go right ahead.
Good morning. My name is Fran Putnam. I live here in Weybridge, and I'm happy to be here and welcome all of our legislators. I learned a new word yesterday. The word is called eco-anxiety. In an article in the Addison Independent, I learned that the students of the North Branch School have been studying climate change for the last 2 years. And the more they learn, the more anxious they become. And thus the word eco-anxiety. And this is my new word for myself, and I think a lot of other people here. This morning, there are between 100 and 200 of these students and their supporters and others marching, or walking, I should say, in the rain from here in Middlebury to Montpelier to raise this issue so that it becomes the top issue, not somewhere near, anyway, after the top 5. So I'm suggesting that maybe our legislators and our governor get a little more eco-anxiety so these students can get a little less, and so some of us can sleep a little better at night. Specifically, I want to talk about the weatherization assistance bill, which is working its way through the legislature. My legislator stood up in town meeting and promised to support this bill, and then voted against it. And he's not the only one. So I'm saying this is a very modest proposal that would have helped reduce the effects of climate change. And please don't tell me it's going to hurt poor people, because the average cost for a year would be $15 for every Vermonter. I think it's worth it. I think it's maybe one small thing that our legislators can do this year, and they need to do a whole lot more. Thank you.
Yes, I'd like to respond to that. I'm the legislator that we're talking about, and at the town meeting I said, yes, I support weatherization. It's a great program, and the devil's in the details. And that's where, for me anyway, the problem arises. If that weatherization program came through the appropriations bill, it would have been supported without any question on my part, really. We had a bill come out of the House Ways and Means Committee that raised around $4.5 million for the weatherization program. We found out that there's about $1.9 million from last year's program that hasn't been utilized yet. It has been spoken for, but it hasn't been utilized. We were asking questions about the program and the support of the program and the capacity of the program to deliver these dollars in an efficient way. And it became very clear that the presenter of the bill was talking about, well, we have plenty of handymen out there, we can give the money to them and they can do a fine job. And I don't think it's that simple. I think that if we're going to have state monies going into a program, it ought to be well defined, and we need to have a good definition of how they're going to be used, and the folks that are applying the program need to be trained in that handling those programs.
So we have a House and a Senate both working on this issue. On the Senate side, there's Senate Bill S-171, which is, I've been calling the Weatherization for All bill, because it focuses not just on low-income weatherization, but trying to... I'm just going to talk him over here.
Turn off the microphone. Or use one of the back mics.
Move the mic to your left.
How about this?
How about I have a mic over here?
All right, so S-171, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Great. Is a weatherization for all bill. In other words, the state has a low-income weatherization program. We also have moderate-income weatherization program. And weatherization makes great sense for everyone who does that work. You save money in an entirely predictable and reliable way. You deliver an environmental benefit across the board to everyone in the state, and you deliver public health benefits in the weatherized home and to the public at large. So it's a win-win-win program, however you parse it. The question is, why haven't, it's often been referred to as low-hanging fruit. It's been low-hanging fruit since I got to the legislature 11 years ago, which has been a frustration. Why haven't we brought more funds into it to pick up the pace at which we do the work? In our testimony, we learned that Efficiency Vermont, which is a nation-leading program on energy efficiency for electrical, we pay into that program at 11 times the rate that we fund our fossil fuel heating programs. So it's no surprise, really, that we've made much more progress on using electricity more efficiently than we have on helping people heat more efficiently. It's been, I'd say, on sort of a starvation diet. If you take the current program and look at every Vermonter who's eligible for the low-income weatherization program, the waiting list is approximately 50 years. So it's not an adequate response. The House, I'd say, made a bold move in saying, we see the opportunity to do more. We're going to step up and pass a Ways and Means bill, a revenue bill, H4 39, and take the 2-cent levy and move it to 4. It'll allow us to move the low-income weatherization program from about 900 units a year to somewhere in the neighborhood of 1350. So it's a step in the right direction. But really, we could double and double again that program and still have a modest program that would be very cost-effective across the board for Vermonters. So I hope that we find a way to fund that program, not just at a pace that's double what we're doing now, but double again in years to come. We've taken a lot of testimony to make sure that we don't go much of the problem. We looked at the training program that's affiliated with it. It trains people to work in weatherization as well as deliver those services. It's always, from the outset, it's been a job development and training program, as well as delivering the weatherization service. They go hand in hand. It develops a workforce. Starting wages are roughly $19 an hour. This is hard work, but it's also good wages go with it. It's really an excellent economic opportunity for the state of Vermont. And the other thing to remember is, as we do things like switch to electricity as a heat source, heat pumps for instance, we can be supplying clean electricity to those pumps rather than burning the fossil fuels. One last thing quickly on costs and dollars and cents. The average increase was anticipated to be about $15 a month, $15 a year, the increased tax. Low-income advocates came to the committee and said, please go ahead and do this. Yes, that's $15 a year from people who are already facing tough budgets, but we know how cost-effective it is, and we want you to pick up the pace because we have thousands of people being served, tens of thousands more who could use service. And you know, if you pay with an average savings of $600 in the first year that your home is weatherized, you could pay in for, you could be on that waiting list for 40 years, and then finally they get to you, and your first year savings will have recovered that increased fee for the 40-year period. Obviously, we want to have people waiting far less than 40 years. So the sooner people get service, the sooner they're going to be able to save, and the sooner we'll all do better on climate change.
I just thought I'd add a few more details from the House side. The bill, for those of you who don't know, added 2 cents onto the current 2 cent fuel tax, which has been around for decades and has always funded weatherization. And this is not really about just sort of giving money to any handyman who might be able to do weatherization. The money would be funneled through agencies that specialize in this. And the ability to disperse it in a rapid form is certainly a topic of conversation about when we look at our workforce in general in Vermont. However, the workforce development bill that also passed through the House, which this does not fund, did include $250,000 to beef up training of folks to work in this field. And as Chris said, these are pretty decent paying jobs, providing skills to people that we're going to need for years to come. And I think it really can be adequately described as a real win-win-win in terms of job development, economic development, climate change. It's low-hanging fruit. And when you think about who benefits from this, not 100% of low-income people pay it, but 100% of low-income people derive the benefit.
Hi, I'm Lynn Dyke from Bristol, and my thing is the eco-anxiety. I also read that article. And I think when kids are anxious, or anybody gets anxious and they are fearful, they don't behave well. We get angry with people who aren't doing what we want them to do. I don't think kids that are in the 3rd grade or whatever really need to be worrying about all of this. I talked to a woman the other night and she said, she is in the medical field, and there was a 10-year-old boy there, and she was getting ready to do a procedure with him, and she used something plastic for a barrier, and he said, "You're ruining my future, you're using plastic." And I think we don't need that. I think one thing that would help this situation a lot would be stop scaring people. And when we do things out of fear, we are not acting rationally. There is a way to fix this problem. But I remember when people were against smoking, you know, they told my granddaughters, people smoke, they're going to die. So she wasn't so fearful of her father dying. They couldn't have quality time together because she was always thinking, "You're smoking, you're going to die, stop it." Please, we've got to calm down a little bit and be adults and do what we need to do, yes, but we don't need to be, I don't even know if 10-year-olds really realize what they're marching for or what. They're just scared. So I just think there's a lot more loving way to do this.
May I speak? Sam Gornach, I'm from Middlebury, and we need to completely change the conversation. I have, there is a complete emergency on planet Earth now. And there is simply no way to continue. The devil is in the details? No. There is difficulty in the details. The devil is in the systems that keep us trapped in these conversations about incremental change. Now, here's a story. In World War II, the car companies who had the ability to make tanks and airplanes and bombs resisted with all their might doing that until there was a national top-down mandate for them to change. And for 5 years, no cars were made by these car companies. The tobacco companies held on and were working in evil, systemic ways to continue to promote tobacco, to Joe Camel to the children and all of that kind of thing. Yes, we need to deal with this anxiety, we need to do it lovingly, but love sometimes needs to be tough. And when there are patients bleeding in the emergency room, that is not the time to stand around and talk about the niceties of what cousin gets to visit the patient, you know, that afternoon or whatever. Okay, so seriously, the legislatures, all of us need to recognize that this is an emergency. The loving thing to do with children is to learn to speak helpfully and lovingly and supportively to them, but not to tell them the truth. Greta Thunberg from Sweden, last year, many of you have seen her YouTube. Watch it, and watch a young child, you know, speak the way I'm speaking now with real passion and real caring. If you love your children and your grandchildren, you will do everything you can to change the systems, to put this issue at the front, no matter what, no excuses. Okay, and I include myself, and we're all complicit. So I drove here in a car. Yes, it's a Prius, but that's not nearly good enough. We need to put our bodies on the line and our hearts. Thank you.
It is my understanding that questions are supposed to be directed to a member of the legislature. Is that how we roll this out?
Any one of them can answer your question.
Okay.
Last one was a statement, so.
Apparently. So, Harvey. I'm not going to make a statement.
Go ahead.
I'm just going to ask, who am I?
Yeah.
Dan Monger, New Haven, Planning Commission. Harvey, has there been any studies prior to the weatherization bill that shows the amount of carbon that is decreased with the weatherization of a house and how that offsets what's going on in China, India, and Brazil?
Wow. I'm not aware that any study that Vermont has done is evaluating what's happening in other countries in the world. I just don't know. We know where we are in Vermont and what we're doing. And by the way, there has been, you know, some questions raised about the weatherization program and just the efficiency and the effectiveness of it. And I think that's something that, you know, we could look at and see. I know when we have homes that are in their second or third round of weatherization, have we come up with new products and new methods for weatherization that weren't available when we did it the first time? You know, I don't know how to answer that question. But I think if we're going to spend this kind of money, and I agree that we should be doing what we can to cut down on the use of fossil fuels and do it in a way that's cost effective. I don't think that we're going to be able to stop things overnight. You know, when we talk about, well, you know, I was thinking of that resolution that the town of Middlebury passed that said we were going to hit 90% by 2030. And wow, that's a great goal. I don't know how we're going to do that. And if we have to build some facilities in order to do that, it's going to take almost all that time just to get permits to do the job. So I don't know really what the answer is, but I like Chris Bray's response, because I think he's taken a very thorough look at the whole situation and trying to find a way to make the whole system work better, be more efficient, reach our goals that we're looking for. And you know, I'll be waiting for that bill to come over to the House. Thank you.
Oh, just power again. Right. So power again. Just a bit over that. You know, on the weatherization thing, whenever we spend, I'd say one of the shared values in the legislature, regardless of party, is a sense of fiduciary responsibility. Every legislator wants to know that dollars that we're raising are well spent. And I see a lot of efforts across the board to make sure that we are evaluating how effective programs are and trying to tune them. No one ever expects our work to be perfect in any way, but I think we have a lot of good programs. Some are really nation-leading. Again, I want to mention Efficiency Vermont. They go through a very rigorous process at the Public Utility Commission. Their budget is it's defined as a tariff, you know, it's part of your electric bill. They have to go through a whole rate making that says how much money is going to be raised, how are all those dollars spent, is it cost effective? 20 years on in Efficiency Vermont, even though we've already done the lowest hanging fruit on energy efficiency, for instance, taking out old incandescent bulbs, going to CFLs. Now CFLs are going to LEDs, but there's many other things they do. We're still saving about $2 for every $1 we put into Efficiency Vermont 20 years in. So I just want to reassure people that it's a shared sense of that we spend dollars wisely and that we evaluate the performance. On the question of what's Vermont going to be doing compared to the impact of other players around the globe, to me, it's a question that I would answer from a moral basis, a stewardship basis. I think Vermont should do the best it can for itself always. Whether we're going to tip the scale on any kind of global question or not is really, to me, irrelevant. We should step up and do the best we can for ourselves to live as good stewards. There are many polls over the years about what Vermonters value about Vermont, and one of the top things over and over again is environment, health, sort of a clean, safe place to live. So, and when you ask them about spending money on clean water or clean air, over and over again, a strong majority say that's what we want to invest in. So when we look at Vermont's impact on global carbon emissions and things like that, it's an interesting question, but I think the question we can answer by just taking care of our own responsibilities here at home.
Mark Bobin, Addison, Vermont. I look at this as an economic issue, and we should put the money where we're going to get the quickest payback. And as Chris pointed out, you're getting better than doubling your money by putting it in certain energy savings. Now, we spend 43%, we use 43% of our energy is used for transportation, 41% is used for heating. But yet the legislature has been subsidizing or giving grants for the electric. For solar, there's a proposal to give a 10% tax credit for solar. The Volkswagen settlement is going to be used for putting in electric cars. That money would be better spent on weatherization. It will give you a bigger bang for the buck. You'll save more carbon going in the emission into the environment. by putting it into weatherization. However, building a bureaucracy to oversee that and training people, why not make YouTube videos to tell people how to do it? Make it available in one site where they can do it, and take the sales tax off of the weatherization things that they have to buy. You can do that either directly by taking the tax off or by giving them a credit when they file their tax returns. Thank you. If any legislature wants to respond.
I guess I'm next. Barb Wilson, I'm from Shoreham. We are in a crisis. And, you know, when I look at the face of our youth, it just, you know, including myself, I see that anxiety, and I think the best way to help with that anxiety is action. I'm sorry, you know, we're putting Band-Aids on the solutions. We're doing what we can because this should be a bipartisan issue. It shouldn't matter, it's tripartisan, let's say that. It shouldn't matter if you're a Dem, you're a Republican, or you're progressive. We should all be coming to the table and doing the best damn job we can to fight climate change. And they are doing other things in other countries. China has more solar panels and rolling out more. They're making us look pathetic, to tell you the truth. They're actually realizing that in order to survive as a planet, we need to move forward, and they're making some money and putting infrastructure in place as in respect to that. So as far as I'm concerned, until we all come to the table and have some accountability here on all sides of the aisle and start really putting our heart and soul into this, instead of coming up with excuses of why I didn't vote for something or how to minimize, you know, the amount of effort that's put into this, we're not going to get anywhere. And my anxiety and the anxiety of our youth is going to just continue to increase. And they're not stupid. We don't have to tell them, you know, they're going to see it, right? They're going to see it. They see the action that's being taken. And that increases the anxiety. It's not what we, you know, just what's in the media. It's around us all the time. And so if we really love our children at a minimum, we should be doing this. So I really encourage people to, including ourselves, we all should understand our climate footprint and see what we contribute. You would be surprised how much carbon you contribute to this whole problem. We need to all be in this, but our legislature needs to work in a bipartisan way. And that's the challenge.
Yes, I'd like to respond to at least part of that, and that is there's a lot of activities going around the state that are working to that goal, and one of them is a side benefit for cleaning up the waters. And that is, the agriculture community has changed a lot of their practices which they have been following for generations. And one is no-till or minimum till, keeping the ground covered at all times. And by doing so, they reduce phosphorus reduction or phosphorus runoff, creating a reduction in phosphorus going into the waters. But it also creates a great mass of root system in there that sequesters carbon. So at the same time that we're working to clean up water quality, we also have some real side benefits for directly addressing, you know, pulling carbon out of the air and sequestering it in our soils. So, and there's probably some other programs going on too that I'm not really aware of, but those are the kind of things that we don't really talk about, we don't really see, we don't really understand, but it's there for, you know, we've increased our organic matter in our soils. I mean, it got down really low over the years from continuous cultivation, and now, you know, 1–2% would be pretty good for that organic matter in your soil. We have a lot of farms now that are above 6%, and that's happened in the last 10 years or so. I know I have some of my soils at 13%. I don't know how much higher you can go. I assume that that's probably the upper level because I haven't done any tillage on that ground for probably 30 years. So it just keeps building that root capacity and also the carbon sequestration. So there are some positive things that are going on, but we don't see them as we're driving down the road. We don't really understand them unless people talk about them.
Tisha Wolf from Addison. I have a question back to still on the carbon topic. Given that the measure that tells us what the problem is that we have and when we've reached our solution is the measure of carbon, is there a way for some part or all of our legislature to come together and let us know how the work that's being done on the various bills, and there are numerous, comes together as a total and shows us that the math works out, that in the time frame that the IPC says we have, which is zero reduction of carbon emissions, zero in 30 years, so by 2050. So I think part of the anxiety is knowing that the pace is so desperate in terms of the brevity of time that we have and the fact that we have to do the most recovery immediately in order to actually meet that goal. But we don't know if what our legislature is doing in this committee and that committee and this bill and that bill, in summary, will get us there. And I think we need that information. It will tell us how to act. It will tell us where to contribute. It will tell us what we should teach people more about. And we would all be more effective if we at least had a shared understanding of what our efforts are going to get us to, and if it's not going to meet that zero emissions by 2050, then we're wise enough to figure out how to plug ourselves in and augment things so that we can really get there. I think we're good enough to do that. So the question is there a way to make that information ours?
So that's maybe the biggest question I've heard in a while. How to make the whole picture ours. As a source of information, I can't recommend too highly the Energy Action Network, sometimes you see it as EAN, their annual report that just came out about a month ago, because it goes across the three main ways we use energy, so thermal, transportation, and electrical generation. It lays out how we're doing in each of those sectors in terms of emissions, use, efficiency, all that kind of work. And then it also shows if we're trying to keep pace with the various, like the Paris Accord or the 90 by 2050 goal, what kind of trajectory do we have to be on in all those sectors? And there's a chart in the middle of the book that shows things to do to hit the 2025 targets. And it has like 14 different measures to take. And we are well below pace on every single one of those measures. So when we were talking about weatherization before, if we really picked up the pace on, it says by 2025 we'd have to weatherize 90,000 homes in the state of Vermont. We've been at it since 2008, and we've done 25,000. So a decade for 2,500 a year, sort of a running average. And so here we are looking 6 years out, and we have 90,000 to do. So we need 15,000 plus 16,000 a year. So that's the best document I can point to in terms of trying to have a good picture of all the kind of work in energy that we do in order to meet those kinds of climate change targets. In terms of tracking in the legislature, the legislative website, is a great window into looking at individual bills across House and Senate. But and you can search on a key term like energy, and then you would pull up a list of every bill that uses that as a keyword. So there is information available. What I have to say I think is lacking though is, and I'm not picking on this governor per se, but the legislature has a very hard time leading in a strong way on an issue. We are this wide, this 180 member wide deliberative body. We're good at getting work done, but I think driving policy in a direction is best done by the executive branch. The governor had, so I'm not passing the buck, I'm just looking at 30 years of Vermont history. And I look back at what Madeline Kunin was able to do in creating the our Dr. Dinosaur program. This bold move that said every child in the state of Vermont is going to have health care as well as his or her mother and during maternal care. Where did that come from? I think it came out of the executive and it was driven through the legislature. You can see it in Act 250. There's a whole series of big moves that, and I think the legislature is not necessarily designed to come up with a bold plan of change and implement. We're good at implementing, but not so good at implementing. And so I'm not passing the buck. It's just, I think, I'm thinking about it a lot lately. I think it's not our nature to design an entire solution and drive it forward.
May I repeat my question?
Sure.
The question is there a way, and I'm talking about going forward, for the state to let us know, as a population of the state, the math that explains how any set of bills that comes together out of this session, what it covers in terms of carbon recovery relative to the goal that we have of zero emissions in 2050. And I think that's different than having each person have to go to a website and wade through things. And you know, most of us don't have the math knowledge at our fingertips, but there certainly are scientists available to the state that can do that summary of if we institute this bill on energy, this bill on transportation, this bill, and maybe one that's a little piece for weatherization, then the predictions are that if we really institute it within this time frame, that we can accomplish this much carbon reduction by this deadline. I mean, I think it's not only a mathematical problem, but we can't know where we stand without understanding that aspect of it. So the question again is there a way going forward for us as citizens of the state to understand that math and to understand what the implications of it are, and thereby we should be able to figure out by using the best of the science around us where we should really be putting our efforts. I mean, I laud kids walking to Montpelier, but I think it's because they're scared that by the time they're 30, things might not be together, not because they understand how that's going to track to something specific happening that reduces a specific amount of carbon. Thank you for that. I know I took over time, but I didn't know how to say it in brevity.
So I think the short, realistic answer, as best I know, is there is no real-time mechanism for the legislature itself, no less citizens, to check in and see, like, the whole suite of bills in front of us, what would it accomplish? How does it change the trajectory for our? It's more piecemeal. Between the comprehensive energy plan and that energy action now report, you can get a good sense of the major gears, how they turn, the kind of rates we need to do work at. But it's very hard to look at what a legislative session's work is going to accomplish and say, well, how much did we move the needle this session?
We had a lot of jets lined up on the microphone. That's good. Harvey?
Yes. Well, you bring up a really great suggestion or question, and understanding that, and I was trying to think of the responses to that, and I served on the Efficiency Vermont Advisory Board for a number of years, and tried to track the amount of CO2 reduction, and we were looking at how to reduce the electric consumption over a period of time. And as you reduce that consumption, it's hard to track because we're no longer generating that. So we can tell, you know, when we do energy efficiency projects in buildings and stuff, we have that knowledge. But then when you tie that to the carbon, and then we shut down a nuclear power plant, all of a sudden our carbon footprint skyrockets. So we were doing fairly well on a trajectory prior to shutting down Vermont Yankee, and then all of a sudden we're not even keeping pace with our goals on carbon. So there's a whole bunch of choices, you know, that we need to make in the whole process, and I don't see how we're going to replace all of our transportation system, whether that's our individual automobiles or our trucking industry, our trains and, you know, mass transit operations to meet that zero carbon footprint. I just can't comprehend how to do that. We can work towards it. You know, the electric vehicles, the cars, you know, they've kind of picked up, but we need to do a lot more in that area. How do we change our transportation for moving goods and services around and do it without using carbon? Right now, nobody showed me what the options are, or even talked about what the options are maybe to do that. So we have to be realistic as we're going forward too, and we need to continue on a reducing carbon, but I'm not sure if we're going to get to 0%. I mean, people might say that I'm 0% heating my home. I haven't bought any fuel to heat my home in 40 years. But I do use wood. But that's not carbon neutral. That's just a different carbon. It's a carbon that's regrowing, regenerating on the planet. You know, the same as, you know, our life age is about the same as a lot of the trees, but it's still carbon. So we're trading some offsets for another carbon source, but not calling it carbon.
So to be clear, we can't solve the problem, and we have to be realistic about that, so just brace ourselves for 2050.
No, I didn't say that at all. I said we need to continue to head in the direction that we are, but we need to be realistic in figuring how we're going to get there. But if we're I mean, I honestly don't know. And even if we reduced 100% of carbon that we consume, and I don't know how we're going to do that because we're in a carbon-based environment. And I just don't know how we're ever going to get to zero. I mean, zero is a point. We don't have control over some sources of carbon. You know, a volcanic reaction. I mean, that creates a huge amount of carbon in just a heartbeat. And we don't have any control over that whatsoever. We do have control over our habits and what we do, and we should be working in that realm to meet the goals.
Good morning. I'm Amy McIntosh, and I'm from Middlebury.
Closer to the mic.
Thank you. And I've been working on the plastic bag ban in Middlebury, and I guess I have a statement and a question. The statement is that as groups are forming in Vergennes and Bristol and other towns to ban plastic bags locally, we're hoping that we can provide some steam for the representatives in the House as S-113 moves over from the Senate side. And we want to thank Senator Bray for organizing S-113 and seeing that through. And I guess my question has to do with how mystified I am by the legislative process as I've been watching this bill move through. And we've been mystified by a relatively clean, very, very nice bill move through committee and have carve-outs added and have certain provisions added. And as an ordinary citizen watching this process, I have no idea where those carve-outs came from. I don't know which senators were forwarding that. I don't know who voted for them, and I don't know at this point how we can exert, as ordinary citizens, exert effort on those senators, pressure on those senators to relent or to convince them that we need to take those carve-outs out. And so if anybody has some insight into how ordinary citizens can inject themselves into this process, it'd be really great. Thank you.
Well, if you could explain the carve-outs a little, then I could probably respond, because the bill spent almost all its development period in Senate Natural Resources and Energy. And just for people so they know, so S-113, the plastics bill, single-use plastics bill, it says the very super lightweight single-use plastic bags you get at grocery stores, etc., those would be banned as of July 1, 2020, so roughly 15 months from now. Likewise, single-use plastic straws would be, they're not banned, but they're in food service establishments, they won't be provided anymore unless you make an explicit request. That's in order to enable people who need a straw in order to be able to drink, to get a straw if they need. And then third, it bans, for the most part, there are some exceptions. Polystyrene, expanded polystyrene, stuff most of us call styrofoam, that kind of packaging from Commerce, again, July 1, 2020. So, but I'm happy to talk about the evolution of the features in the bill, and then what seems like a carve-out, and explain how that happens.
Well, one example is for, one example is a prescription drug card, that if you go into a drugstore and buy a prescription drug, you can get a plastic bag. Or retail stores smaller than 1,000 square feet. Right, so that's gas stations and maple fields and Subway sandwich shops are excluded from the ban, as I understand the state of the bill now.
Sure. So, great question. Thank you. I mean, there's a lot of features in the bill. Some of them come out of testimony we take as the bill. We take the testimony, we hear about issues, they come up. But I won't pretend to have written that bill from scratch. This summer and fall, when I was interested in moving something, I went reading bills around the country, and the bill I started with, the closest one that made sense to me was a New Jersey bill. So that was the basis for some of the features that are still in that bill. For instance, the 1,000 square foot exemption, the smallest stores. Is that the right number? You know, you could say it has a basis because it grew out of a bill that was already developed elsewhere. And we often build and edit based on, you don't often start completely from scratch. However, the fourth feature of that bill is that it creates a working group for the summer and fall to look into two things. One, the implementation of this bill as currently designed, as well as to try to see if we can get ahead of the problem. So it looks at what we're calling extended producer responsibility. That means if you create a product, you're responsible for how it's disposed of at the end of its lifetime. So we already do this for batteries, light bulbs, things containing mercury, switches, thermostats, paint. When you buy it, there's a fee that's built into the price, or you pay it at the time you pick it up, and that ensures that that product is recycled responsibly at the other end of its life. Right now, 50% of all plastic produced is for packaging, so rather than let this huge avalanche of plastic get produced and then just have a problem to clean up, we're saying, can we change the story and go back to the outset, working with the creators and distributors of packaging, and reduce its creation from the beginning. That same group and the full legislature will convene. The group will report before we come back in January, and then the legislature will have the chance to take testimony again to look at anything that's been identified. It could be, what's the how useful is that 1,000 square foot threshold? Should it be decreased, eliminated? And who knows what the answer would be. But any feature in that bill is up for further discussion. What we're doing now is giving people ample time to anticipate making the switch. And that was based on Brattleboro's testimony. They gave themselves, it was 15 months from start to finish, from the idea that let's get rid of single-use bags in Brattleboro to full implementation. And they, the town manager came up and provided testimony and said the reason they thought it came off so very smoothly there was that there was an ample time to develop the rule, implement the rule, then reach out to vendors, merchants, and reach out to citizens of Brattleboro. So on the day the switch went, July 1 of last summer, they said it was without a hiccup almost, and people were proud of the program, embraced the program, and it's been very successful. So we're using a similar long timeline and giving ourselves opportunities to edit in the future. So the bill as it stands, I would never say it's, never say that it's about any bill. It's not perfect, but I think it's a pretty sound construct to move forward. And then it's got mechanisms built into it so that we can continue to improve it before it's ever implemented. And then of course after too, we'll have to monitor what's the real world impact, and maybe features of that bill need to change once it's become law.
I just want to add generically, not specifically about this bill, but generically, if there are things in legislation that are before the Senate or the House, if you see that it's in a committee, the most effective thing is to contact members of that committee, particularly if one of us is on that committee. The bill, S-113, is now going over to the House, and I'm assuming it will be in the House Natural Resources. Is that where it will be? And that committee is chaired by Amy Sheldon of Middlebury, and Representative Smith is also on that committee. So if you have particular concerns or ideas, those two would be great people to talk to. But just in general, a lot of what we do in the legislature is driven by the testimony we hear from people who come to the legislature and speak to our committees. So any of you who have particular expertise or interest in a topic could contact one of us and ask to testify. We also hear a lot from constituents via email and text and phone calls and letters and all kinds of ways that people get a hold of us. And then the third thing is that we all try to work together and collaborate and compromise. And sometimes some things get put in a bill because a particular legislator who's working on it really needs that to be in the bill in order to vote for it. So we try to find compromise so that we can create the best piece of legislation that the most legislators will vote for. And sometimes it means we have to put things in the bill that maybe I don't personally like, but somebody on my committee wants. So I'm sure everybody understands compromise in this room. So just wanted to remind people of that. So that's kind of how it works. And then sometimes it happens on the floor. There were floor amendments on this particular bill that we needed to, as a full Senate, consider to make sure that we could pass a bill that the majority of the Senate supported. So thank you.
Hi, this is Barb again. As I was driving over this morning, I had VPR on, which is always on my radio, and this is going to change to water quality. I was alarmed to hear that because of it being snow cover on the ground for such a long period this winter, that there were a lot of permits given for farmers to put manure on their fields. And in fact, in Panton, which is in our county, there was a farm that spread manure mid-March on the snow, and someone videotaped the runoff going into Lake Champlain. In our day and age, it seems to me that we can come up with some better solutions here. Yes, manure pits have a tendency to overflow if in fact you can't get the manure out of them, but why not have a policy where, you know, we invest in some trucks that help farmers by extracting some of that manure and taking them over to a frickin' ingester and turn it into electricity or cow power or something like that, as opposed to allowing this to continue to run into our lake. So I think we need to get a little more creative on our solutions, and I think there are some solutions out there that could be implemented. And, you know, I always look at, well, what can we do? And that was like one thing that came to my mind. Why couldn't we, you know, take advantage of turning this into cow power, have a service instead of fining the farmer to extract the overflow, you know, what's in jeopardy, instead of giving them permission to put it on the fields where it's going to end up in a river or in Lake Champlain eventually.
Barb, I'm trying to, your question specifically was why couldn't we take it to a digester?
Yeah, yes, can we look at maybe some more innovative approaches instead of just the traditional ones that we've implemented or done in the past, and just give a permit to allow them to dump it? You know, to spread it. You know, what would it cost to, you know, have a service to go and help extract some of this manure residue in these pits and then take it to Blue Spruce Farm or someone that has an ingester and turn it into cow power?
Okay. So I don't know the specific answer to that, except for that there are a limited number of digesters in the state. I actually just on Saturday afternoon spent the afternoon at Monument Farms, where they had a tour of their digester. It was very cool and also kind of gross at the same time. They are at capacity, and I think most of the digesters are at capacity, so they can't just take on extra manure into their, especially, oh, hey, we have a problem today, can you just take this extra? So that's my impression, is that the digesters in the state are basically working at capacity. The one at Monument Farms is not only taking their manure from their operation, but also I learned the waste from the cider mill, what is it called? Otter Creek's woodchuck cider, and also some of the whey from Cabot, from the Cabot cheese plant. So I think that's the answer to why we can't do that unless we have more digesters. So one question I am going to look into is what would it take to get more digesters, because that's what I left going, wait, we need more of these. The specific issue in Panton, and I heard, we drove in together this morning, we were probably both listening to VPR, and that story about the runoff in Panton, and I heard about it instantaneously because somebody texted me a video the day that it happened, and I was sitting in the Ag Committee with the Agency of Ag right next to me, and I said, hey, you guys, what's going on? And they already knew about it by the time I knew about it. That situation has been referred to the Agency of Natural Resources. My understanding, I don't know all the details, but my understanding is that the farmer in question actually went above the permitted amount. He was allowed to spread, but then he spread more than he was permitted and did it in more areas than he had been allowed to do it. So that's my understanding of that. It's not the normal situation. It went above and beyond the normal situation. It's now been referred to the Agency of Natural Resources, and action will be taken against that individual for violating the permit.
So they need a solution so that they're not that desperate. It sounds like they were desperate.
Yeah, I think there are more details to the story, and I don't want to speculate here in public, but I think that that situation is not the norm. It was a unique, unfortunate situation. So.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that as well. And it sounds like it's fairly simple to take that manure to a digester and have the digester generate some electricity out of it. And I agree that that's what we should be doing with a lot of this. And, you know, we've been working to expand that program. However, we haven't built a digester since the U.S. government stopped giving some cost-shared assistance to make that happen. So we're struggling there. And also, even if you do take it to a digester, to generate electricity. It doesn't eliminate the volume of the liquid that's left over. So the byproduct coming out of there is still about the same volume. So then the alternative is to build some additional storage pits until the weather gets appropriate for the application of that. And we've been doing that for a number of years. If you drive around, you see a lot of the larger farms anyways have multiple pits and satellite pits around their farm, and some of that effluent is piped underground from one pit to another, so we don't have to use big equipment up and down the road, and it's substantially more efficient. We use a lot less carbon-based fuels to get it from one place to the other. However, now in the water quality realm, the Agency of Natural Resources has created a system and changed their permitting process for permitting those pits to begin with. So it's going to be much more difficult. It's going to be much more expensive to do that. So at the same time we want to clean up the water of the state, we're putting up hurdles for addressing some of the issues that you raised about storage. So I don't know really what the answer is. I can't believe one hand isn't talking to the other.
Mark Moven again. I'd like to address that same issue. I got rid of my cows a little over 10 years ago, but I did negotiate with them on that, and I'll tell you some of the parameters of negotiating per pit. The pit is designed according to specs by the USDA based on the size of your farm and the number of cows you have. If you build a pit bigger than what they specify, you do not get cost sharing for that pit. So farmers build to that design. The design specs is on an average year that it will hold the number of cows you have. This year we have 27 more inches of snow than normal. The state has the restriction that you have to stop spreading on December 15th, whether the ground is frozen or not. The number of years I've been out in January plowing, I could have been spreading too, but I wasn't able to because of the ban. So when you have a restrictive, hardwired ban to stop spreading, even though the conditions would allow it, don't complain about somebody having to spread it at the other end when the conditions don't require, aren't optimal for spreading. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm Paula Gornacha from Middlebury. This is more in the category of a statement. I think that a lot of the ways we think about things are around language, and I really advocate that we start talking about climate emergency instead of climate change. It helps to elevate the conversation to maybe a level where it needs to be. And also, I'm an advocate for big, audacious goals. If we don't put out a vision of what we need and really articulate it, whether we know how we're going to get there or not, we don't really have the energy we need to move forward. India was invoked, and my husband and I were in India in February working on a project, and their environmental issues are enormous. They are present and visible in the air you breathe, in the waterways, in the trash that is everywhere. And believe me, they are having some big, audacious goals out there. You know, big cities banning plastic bags by 2030, not 50, banning fossil fuel vehicles. I don't know if they're going to get there, but that's what they've got out there. Armies of people going out in gloves and masks to try and clean up rivers. They see the problem. They see it because it's there. You can't breathe. You wear a mask or a scarf around your face. We are not there yet, and we may never get there, but you know, we can be an example. We can be people look up to Vermont. Some of the biggest ideas in this country have come out of this state. You know, we're a brave little state that can show the way, and I really believe that because we're seeing it happening. So I think putting out, and maybe it's the executive branch, maybe it's us, maybe it's us, and we have to elect people who put this as their #1 priority. Thanks.
Craig Zondag, New Haven. First of all, I want to thank Representative Conlon and Representative Shaw to help support the efforts of 2 small mosquito districts in the state by helping to appropriate $50,000, both of which that would be split $25,000 to each district. And I don't know where this is at in the Senate yet. Has it gone through the Senate? Not yet, okay. So I'm here to stand to encourage the Senate to continue to push that through. It's a fairly modest amount, but it will, at least this season, afford us to continue to do the science that we do in knocking down mosquitoes in the Lemon Fair Valley for the towns of Bridgeport, Weybridge, and Cornwall. So, and looking forward, you know, mosquitoes are, unfortunately, they're not going to be going away, and we just need to be keeping an eye to the future and looking at how we're going to grow our awareness and management and protection of the public through mosquito abatement. One of those issues for us here in Addison County is our tire piles. There's a species of mosquito called Culex, which is a primary vector for West Nile virus. And unfortunately, our districts aren't afforded to be able to do treatment in those areas because we just treat floodplain mosquitoes and backyard mosquitoes. We can make recommendations for integrated pest management where people can manage keeping Culex out of their yards by emptying containers and also that puddle water, clogged gutters, flower basins, anything that puddles water is going to grow a Culex mosquito, and you can get rid of that on your own. There's a lot we can do to manage that. So there's a lot happening with climate activity. We see mosquitoes migrating north every year, and so I just want everyone to keep that on their radar and look at another piece of the economy that's going to have to address that. So thank you.
Sam Guarnacha again, Middlebury. I do have a question for the legislators, whom I thank deeply from my heart for your willingness to do what you do and to attempt to do in a system that is very difficult to move things quickly. So just a quick note, democracies are fabulous. They're very poorly constituted, Chris, for dealing with emergencies. Okay, so that's why the World War II story is particularly interesting. And so my question for the legislators and for all of us, really, is are you willing to buck the system? Because that's what it's going to take. You know, that's what it's always taken, is people willing to redesign that's how evolution works. It redesigns for the existing conditions. So we are in conditions now that are different. They are unpredictable. Of course, they've always been unpredictable. Human beings love predictability, they love safety, and we love to know what's going to happen. We don't. And so, you know, that is my question, really sincerely. Are you willing, in a poorly constituted system for rapid change, to lead, to take the lead where it is not being offered? And look at the national level for just a second. Do we need leadership on the national level? The further up you go, the worse it gets. Okay, so we tolerate at our local levels, at the state level and at the national level, things that we don't tolerate in our home. That is, people acting unjustly and unfairly toward other people. We don't tolerate that in our home. So we need to find ways. Thank you. So, yeah, that's the question. Are you willing to buck the system?
So my, I'd say, version of bucking the system is to change the system.
Yes.
And I'd say, here's a fundamental one that is a work in progress. I've been working on it for more than a year already. But when we evaluate energy choices in the state of Vermont, we have a sort of a mathematical way of analyzing the impacts. But what we don't do when we talk about environmental impacts is do a full cost-benefit, full life cycle analysis, by which I mean that we look at the pros and cons in terms of impact, for instance, on public health. When you burn fossil fuels, you foul the air. It may not seem like Vermont's air is fouled by having 500,000 vehicles on the road, but it is, and it has a negative public health impact. So when you add in all the, if you have a complete financial analysis of the costs and benefits of a fuel, that's one thing that we haven't been doing yet. We leave many things costs off, so-called negative externalities. And then we often look, if you hear things about Vermont Gas talking about how clean their fuel is relative to oil, that's a burner tip efficiency comparison. But prior to that, the natural gas getting to you, there's an entire grid and an extraction system. There's a lot of methane loss at moments of extraction and processing and in distribution. And so you're understating the negative environmental impacts of burning that gas if you don't include that sort of cradle to grave analysis from the moment of extraction to the moment you burn it. So it's an all-in accounting. And so this math, this analysis technique that I'm working with other legislators to create is something we need to use in the State House, and we need to use it at the Department of Public Service, and then across the street at the Public Utility Commission. And if we don't all have the same deep math that really clarifies the picture and makes transparent what's going on, we're going to be talking past each other for decades to come. And so that's the kind of bucking I'm most interested in, is fundamental change to the system, because I think once we see clearly the full cost and benefit of any fuel choice, we will, as a reasonable and progressive-minded state, I think, make progressive healthcare choices. It won't take ideology to get anyone to move. It will simply make good common sense.
Thank you so much. And I just very quickly, the important thing to remember is that Bill McKibben says it all the time. We're so used to negotiating and compromising, and you can't compromise with physics and chemistry. So that's a great thing.
Down about the last question here, because we're almost time's up.
Standing there for 20 minutes.
I hope I can change the subject. Gordon K. Wood from Middlebury. There is a resolution about to be introduced into the House, and it's apparently also going to be introduced into the Senate, and I'm here to ask delegations to co-sponsor this resolution. It's a resolution to ban nuclear bombs in Vermont. And the reason this has come up is because it has been recently disclosed that the F-35 aircraft is scheduled to be adapted to carry a very lethal nuclear bomb. It'll be a 50-kiloton bomb, which is more than twice the destructive capacity of the Hiroshima bomb, or more than 3 times that destructive capacity. But the worst thing is it will put Burlington on the crosshairs of Russia's system for attacking us in the event of an emergency, and we certainly don't want that. The promotion for the F-35 was supported by Leahy and Bernie Sanders. I don't know about Walsh. And that was at a time when it was not known that this aircraft would be nuclear capable. I think it's time that they change their attitude on this and start to oppose the deployment of the F-35. And I'd like the legislators here to co-sponsor that resolution. Thank you.
Last question.
Okay, this is it's more of a statement, but I've been hearing about the crisis with the environment and the climate. Okay, I think we also have another crisis here, and it is a morality crisis in Vermont. And I'm wondering if there's anybody who cares about that anymore here. I mean, with the age 57, the abortion up till any point in the pregnancy, I'm wondering, if anybody has done a study on all the babies that we have already lost, what is the cost and what is the benefit? And I'm thinking, a woman wants the right to her own body. If you want to pierce everything, if you want to dye your hair red or orange, if you want to exercise, if you don't want to exercise, whatever clothes you want to wear, that is fine. Nobody needs to do this. But this bill, with the amendments that were turned down, I think that is a crisis. That is a crisis here in this state. And yes, we are leading. And I was in Florida, and the people that I talked to was like, what is going on up there? And if our little kids can't even know if they're a boy or a girl without getting chastised or made fun of, I don't even know where that came from. And that is my crisis. I want to do what I can for the environment. Yes, I do. And I am willing to sacrifice some things. But there's also another part. If there's no people here, if there are no grandchildren or great-grandchildren, what good is all of it?
Good statement start for the day. We meet in New Haven, Congregational Church next Monday. See you all there. It'll be a nice day.